Hey everybody, and welcome back to the next part in my guitar solo analysis video series, where I kind of take some of my favorite solos and some of the solos that I've done cover videos to, and I kind of break them down and talk about some of the techniques and the theory behind them and some of the thoughts that maybe the original player had when they were playing it. So this episode is going to be centered around one solo that just blew my mind when it came out, and that was John Petrucci's incredible solo on Under a Glass Moon off the Dream Theater Images and Words album from way back when. I can't remember what year that came out. Probably sometime in the late 80s. I don't know. I can't remember. Anyways, I remember hearing that solo, and what really struck me about it that was very interesting was how it seemed to, John seemed to touch on so many influences that I'm assuming were influences of his, players that were influences of his that were the same as mine. I heard some Steve Vai in there, I heard some Steve Morse in there, you know, there was some just really quick sort of alternate picking, maybe Al Di Meola slightly. So this solo was something that kind of meant something to me because it had a lot of those same influences I had wrapped up into a really cool solo. So at the time, I don't think I ever wanted to touch trying to play it though, because it seemed a little bit too complex, but I probably did mess around with some of the licks from it. But anyways, let's dive over to Guitar Pro 7 and take a look. So today, we're going to examine some of the theory behind what John was possibly thinking, some of the scales, and the really interesting ways that he plays over the changes in this. So let's examine the chord progression first. So I kind of figured out what the chords were loosely based around what the keyboards are doing and the bass, because the bass and the boards are really all it's there's no rhythm guitar. So it seemed to me that for the first 4 bars, he was basing it around like an F sharp minor 7th and an F sharp minor 6th chord, which this is actually just more of like a B 7th chord with an F sharp in the bass, okay? And there was 4 bars of that. Then he went to like an E sus2 E major tonality with an added 13. And that was for 4 bars as well. Then to a C sharp minor 7th. For 4 bars to a B major for 4 bars, and then basically went through that chord progression again, okay? So it's kind of 2 cycles through that. Now, if we examine what that chord progression is diatonic to, what we find out is that that's really a chord progression that's going to be from the key of E major, C sharp minor, whatever we want to think of it as. The F sharp minor would be the 2 chord of the key of E major. E would obviously be the 1 chord. C sharp minor would be the 6 chord. B would be the 5 chord from that key. So really, he could have just, you know, come to, let's say, C sharp minor pentatonic or C sharp minor scale. If he so desired and soloed over this, and it probably would have worked, but he did something much better than that. So let's go through this and let's examine 1 chord at a time what he did. So right off the bat, some folks might think that, well, F sharp minor 7th, it's the 1st chord of the solo, therefore he's playing in the key of F sharp minor, right? Well, you could just, you know, jump in there and start noodling around over an F sharp minor pentatonic, right? What he actually does, if we examine the first licks, is kind of interesting. He starts off with an interesting bend here, a double stop bend, where he has an E up on the high E string on the 12th fret, and he takes the B at the 12th fret on the 2nd string and bends that up to a C sharp. And then follows it up with this. Okay, so if we look at all those notes, C sharp, B, F sharp, G sharp, E, there's nothing that isn't from F sharp minor there. Where it gets interesting is in the next bar. He goes, if you notice, he starts and ends that phrase on a D sharp note, okay? So what that actually implies then is that he's playing in an F sharp Dorian mode, okay? So really, where does F sharp Dorian come from? Well, that comes from E major, right? So he is just playing essentially an E major scale, C sharp minor, however you want to think of it, but he's doing it over top of the F sharp minor chord, giving it an F sharp Dorian tonality. So really nothing too crazy there in the first 2 bars. right? Then he jumps up higher for the last, I'm sorry, that's the first 3 bars. And he jumps up higher here. And just does a sort of descending octave lick, right? He does these 4 notes, G sharp, E, D sharp, B. And again, focusing on having that D sharp note in there. So always centered around F sharp Dorian. So really that whole first 4 bars is centered around F sharp Dorian. So, which we can think of as an E major scale, you know. C sharp minor scale. Right? But over top of the F sharp is going to make it a Dorian. So that's what he does in that first part. So again, to play this, you might want to take it slow, break it into pieces, you know. Now, he then leads into this E major tonality. You see the chord E sus2 with an added 13. That's just what the boards are fleshing the chord out, but it does give this overall E major tonality. So you'd think he could just stick to that same key, the E major scale, or the same scale, I should say, E major scale, which is the same as F sharp Dorian, and just play that. And he sort of does it at the beginning. He does this really interesting, lands perfectly on the E right when he has to when the chord changes. Does a natural harmonic at the 5th fret on the 6th string, which actually just gives us E again, right? A couple octaves higher. But then he does a natural harmonic at the 4th fret. You say, well, what does that give us? Well, that gives us this G sharp here up at the 13th fret on the 3rd string. And then does a little dive before heading into something else. So really, he's playing E and G sharp. Okay, well that's just diatonic to the E major chord he's playing over top of. So just playing around chord tones essentially, right? So that brings us into this lick here where he kind of dives on this and then scoops back up on an E note. Nothing fancy there. These are all notes just from E major again. Right, so that's fine. This is where it gets interesting now. When it switches back to the pure E major chord, he goes to this note here, which is an A sharp. Now that is completely non-diatonic to the key and actually gives where I start to feel the solo starts to lean towards that Steve Vai influence, because by adding this note in over the E major chord, he's actually touching on the E Lydian mode. So he's going outside of what we've already heard. F sharp Dorian, which is just the E major scale. We've heard that, mind you, over the F sharp minor chord. He's sort of kept it as that here. And he does this neat thing. He doesn't really beat us over the head with this A sharp. He hits it and then slowly bends it into a chord tone of E major, which is the note B. But then he ends on that same A sharp note an octave lower to really solidify that Lydian mode that gives it that almost Vai-ish quality to it. So really interesting. So that whole kind of phrase is then he does this monstrous crazy lick, right? Based off of 16th note triplets or groups of 6, however you want to think of these. The tab I have here has him just running down an E major scale, okay? So all of a sudden that Lydian mode is kind of gone because instead of playing the A sharp, it seems he goes back to the A. Now, I never really broke this down and listened to it very slow. He also could have just as easily been doing, you know, the Lydian mode still, but at the speeds he's playing it, I'm not going to question it, you know. You could probably get away with either. And the thing with this is it's all about these targets I talked about way back in the first video in this series when I was doing the George Lynch Kiss of Death. On these types of things, we're really trying to get to start in the right place on the right note, and then end here on the downbeat 1, right? So you could start off playing this very slow in threes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And kind of build the speed up until that's under our fingers comfortably. And then at some point, you're just gonna have to kind of go for it, right? Right? And just kind of, you know, get the almost tremolo picking up. Right? And just kind of wing it and get the speed up by just kind of pushing beyond your limits and beyond the ceiling. But again, just practice that scale if you're not familiar with it. You know, and you can just run up and down there. However many times you have to until you can, right? Okay, so interesting stuff. So basically back to like an E major scale after touching on the E Lydian, right? So, okay. Now he heads back to a C sharp minor 7th chord, or not back to it, to a C sharp minor 7th chord, which would be the relative minor of E major. But this is interesting now. He dives into a totally different thing now. He starts entering in with some blues notes through these phrases. So he kind of makes this more bluesy, but he still keeps in that A sharp note that was making it Lydian over the E. The difference though is if we add that same F sharp note in, over the C sharp minor 7th, it makes it a C sharp Dorian mode he's playing, okay? So he's basically taking, you know, C sharp minor pentatonic type stuff, right? So it's the same origin as the E Lydian, but now we're doing it over C sharp minor, so that gives it a Dorian tonality. I hope that makes sense. I have videos up about this on my channel under my guitar lessons playlist. Look them up, and that'll answer some of your questions about these. But what he does really neat here, targets that C sharp note right when the chord changes to C sharp, and he does this little kind of, and there's where he gets that Dorian tonality. Right there, he puts that A sharp in with the E, right? So, now, this is kind of interesting because this note and this note are from the C sharp blues scale. So he's combining the Dorian sound with the blues sound. So this whole thing, you can see the blues notes, blues scale, so completely combining C sharp Dorian with the C sharp minor blues scale, okay? Again. Okay, so nothing crazy there. And again, taking your time with it, slow these down. Take it a lick at a time if you have to, right? This is all attainable stuff if we slow it down and give ourselves a chance to absorb each section, right? All right, that doesn't matter how slow you go. Try to keep the groove while you're doing it though. You know, if you got to play it like that to get the feel to it, absorb it, and then the speed will come with time. All right, so we move on to his final chord of his 4-chord cycle, which is B. Now this is diatonic again to the key of E major. So far we've seen him play with basically the E major scale over top of an F sharp minor chord, making it F sharp Dorian, right? Then he touched on E Lydian over the E scale or E major chord, right? So E Lydian. Then he touched on C sharp minor over the C sharp minor 7th chord on C sharp Dorian with a little bit of the blues scale added in. So what he does here when it switches to a B chord is he totally changes the tonality around. And he actually goes up to an F sharp major scale, which is really weird because we've been dealing with an F sharp minor tonality. But you say, well, why would he do that? Well, if we take an F sharp major scale and play that over top of a B major chord, it becomes B Lydian. Okay, so he's going back to this kind of Steve Vai-ish thing. Vai was really known for using a lot of Lydian on a lot of his material. So that's where I kind of pick up on the Vai influence in this, if that makes sense. So if you look now, F sharp minor scale, F sharp major scale. But if we focus it on the B, it's going to have that Lydian tonality, and that's what he does here. In the B major chord, the 5th interval is an F sharp. So right on the B, he goes, so he goes F sharp, B, F sharp, F sharp, outlining chord tones. But this is where it gets interesting. Right? So he adds in an F note. That's what gives it its Lydian tonality. Sorry, the first time I got that wrong. So, and again, focuses on this, and because it's over this B major tonality, it has a B Lydian sound. But I might be thinking F sharp major scale, or D sharp minor, however you want to think of it, E flat minor, whatever, however you want to think of it. But all over top of that B, giving it the Lydian. So then he goes up and just does basically a really quick sweep arpeggio over a B major chord. So it starts on B. Right, and that's it. And then finally, this last run, he just runs up a B major scale. Okay, so he kind of gets outside of that Lydian tonality where he was going to put that F note in, which would have been here, right? And he goes back to the E note, making it back to a B major. So he's touched on B Lydian. Now that's just a B major sweep, nothing Lydian about it, right? Leading back to the B major tonality rather than Lydian. So that's kind of neat. Now back up to an F sharp minor 7, starting this chord progression over. So here we are here. And this just kind of gets back more to like a bit of a F sharp tonality, right? He kind of almost looks like a pentatonic scale. More like F sharp minor scale there. Then this. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Now, this has a couple odd notes in it. It kind of looks like he goes back and he's climbing down. The F sharp Dorian scale again, which would be like the E major scale, right? But we see right there, instead of going... This is where I found the Steve Morse influence came in, all these Steve influences, right? These chromatic runs that Steve Morse loved to do so much. And then this note here is a very odd one because we're playing over top of an F sharp minor tonality, but he plays a major third and kind of almost dwells on it for a split second. The thing about this is all moving by so quickly. These are more like passing tones, and I wouldn't want to really think that he's picking these out as chord tones. It just gave a really interesting sound to it. So he's kind of climbing down, thinking, you know, pentatonic with a touch of Dorian with some chromaticism put into it, as well as the way I would kind of think of that. Okay? Yeah, so that whole phrase is kind of interesting and very interesting note choices that he put in there. Now, back to the E sus2 E major tonality. Again, right on cue, right when that chord changes, he hits a nice big low E note and kind of climbs up through, you know, almost like an E sus2 arpeggio that goes along with the E sus2 chord he's playing over top of it. And then adding that in to make it major, right? So almost like an E major add 9 arpeggio. Now this is kind of interesting. I think I play this lick a little different. He starts to get into some tapping here. So he bends at the 5th fret, taps at the 12th fret, and does a bend. So I use my 3rd finger back here. If you notice when I bend, I always kind of try to use my 3rd finger if at all possible. I do use other ones at other times to get some strength behind it, get my bend. And then when I tap, I'm not just trying to get the bend with my tapped finger, I'm using this finger in support. And then pull back off to the 5th fret. I've seen John play this where he goes, right, he kind of taps that note there. When I was doing it, it just seemed so much more fluid to me to keep it all on the same string. So, same thing now. I keep this planted the whole time, right? And there's the touching on the Lydian scale again. So he goes right back to this Lydian tonality again right away. He really likes that. Now this is where it gets monstrously crazy. When you look at this next lick, it's intimidating to anybody. He has 32nd notes grouped into groupings of 9s, 10s, 7s on 16th notes, straight 32nds, groups of 9 and 3. These are crazy fast. Now, you kind of have to just sort of get a gist of what he's doing and ignore note for note. Look for these targets again. What he's doing is he's doing a little chord shape, okay? Using the notes E, C sharp, B, G sharp. So E, G sharp, and E, B, and G sharp, that's going to make up our E major, right? And he's just adding a 6th into there. So it's really like a little E major 6, E 6th arpeggio, okay? When I'm doing these sweeps, I'm lifting my fingers and rolling them back off and on. Okay, that's what keeps the sweeps nice and smooth, all right? So, now what he does after that, so one way we can practice this is just like that. And then he eventually adds in okay? But what does he do? He goes up the sweep once, down the sweep, back up it, but this time rolls those rolls those legato notes on and then off, comes back down the sweep, goes back up the sweep, and does 3 sets of tapping. So when you look at it that way, you kind of come up with a method of hitting these targets that you need, which I think is really important way of going about it, you know, and just working on it nice and slow, getting those sweeps. You know, where they have to be. So that's what he does there. Back to a C sharp minor 7th chord. Now, he goes back right away to getting into this C sharp Dorian tonality, okay? And this is kind of quick bend there. All he's doing is kind of flicking the bar. I have my bar to set up to float a little bit, right? So all I'm doing is I'm you know, I'm not going to get too much more technical about it than that. I'm flicking the bar as I'm hammering between the 11th and the 14th fret, right? Before heading into this little rising lick based off, again, C sharp Dorian. Okay, all based around that Dorian again. But I'm thinking of it in little groups of, say, 3s and 4s. Okay, and again, just taking it slow. Until you feel comfortable with it, okay? We go up to the B chord and more of these little kind of tremolo flicks, right? And it almost seems like he's based around the B major pentatonic scale here. So I'm not even really following what the tab is saying, more kind of just going for it off of that. Really important just to land on the B note there. Before he goes into this monstrous descending run. Now this is crazy because people look at this and go, have no idea where it comes from. Here's my idea on it. And you might say, well, where is that coming from? Well, remember how he was touching on B Lydian before? I feel he's still doing that, but with more of this real Steve Morse style chromaticism thrown in. If you think about the origins of B Lydian, it's actually from the F sharp major scale. So if we examine this, we can kind of see that that's coming from that in a lot of ways, right? So right here, instead of the 15, 16, 18, well, he just throws the 17 in there. Now instead of up here for the B Lydian, so he's just climbing up using 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then when he gets down beyond that on your lowest 3 strings, the pattern would be normally, so all he's doing is going so, and then he kind of climbs over to here before hitting our target note C sharp, okay? So that whole thing then is before he goes into a harmonic on our 4th fret, 3rd string, and raising it up with our bar to a C sharp, okay? Which, again, really matches the chord that we're playing over top of. Wow, so that's pretty crazy. So a lick like that, again, you're looking for targets. You want to land on this final C sharp when it comes time to on beat 1 of measure 177. What goes on in between there is kind of flexible. As long as, you know, I kind of cut out these notes, which is, I think what I did on the performance video I did for this. You know, whatever you get in there, as long as you have that kind of working the way you land on your targets and kind of outline those notes properly, you're going to be okay. So I do have a performance video of this up too. I did this one a long time ago, and then I kind of left it probably a year and a half ago, or no, I don't know, maybe a year ago. I did it a long time ago anyways. And I thought I would redo it just to update it for this. So I have that up along with this, and I'll post the link in the description below so you can check out how I played it and how I applied some of this stuff. So I hope that was of some help to somebody. And I hope that was kind of interesting to sort of see my thoughts on what John Petrucci did and how some of the ways I might have changed it and kind of messed around with it. So I really hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll be back with more of these and a lot of other content. Please like the video and share it if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate all the support, and I will be back soon with some more content. Thanks for tuning in. Ciao for now.